This was years ago. I was probably around 15. I'm 22 now. My grandma had a pacemaker and some complications. She was sent to this old veteran hospital and was confined for 8 days. The hospital alone was already creepy. I always felt uneasy during the times I watched over my grandma. So the hospital allows at least one family member to watch over their relatives and stay the night. Since my dad didn't really care much, that's another story, I offered to watch over my grandma. She and I were pretty close. Now, I loved staying in my grandma's ward. It was lively. There were at least 15 people there. The ward was really big. So while my grandma rested, I made friends. Someone even brought a portable DVD player and we all watched a movie. What I hated about the hospital was the fact it was like a labyrinth. You can easily get lost, especially at night. Anyway, on day 3, I was still getting used to the hallways. My aunt stayed until evening and let me go around to buy myself some food. And since the place was like a maze, I got lost. The next thing I know, I ended up in the morgue. There was a guy there, probably the one in charge of the place. As I made my way out, there was this figure. It was a black, shadowy figure. It was walking down the hall and out of curiosity, I followed. The figure went to a ward and disappeared. I stood in the hallway completely confused. Then, after a few seconds, some guy went out calling for a doctor, shouting about how his dad was no longer breathing, or something like that. I felt chills, and I ran down the hall to go back to my grandma. It took me half an hour to find my grandma's ward. I never told anyone what I had witnessed. I mean, it would be inappropriate, so I kept my mouth shut. On day 6, my aunt left me with enough snacks and some fruit for my grandma before heading home for the night. I waited for my grandma to fall asleep before sleeping in the chair. As I mentioned, the ward was really huge and spacious. The windows were large, so we didn't need any air conditioning or fans because nights were really cold. I always covered my grandma with 2 layers of blankets, and I slept with a jacket on. It was the same cold night and it was quiet. Everyone was asleep. The nurse woke me up a few times here and there for my grandmother's hourly medication, and by 2 a.m. I was no longer sleepy. I was playing on my phone when the clock struck 3, and I felt a soft breeze on the bed behind me. I turned and saw the black figure again. I almost dropped my phone. The old lady on the bed was sleeping and her son, or grandson, I don't know, was sleeping soundly too. I looked away, not wanting to see whatever was going to happen. By 5 a.m., when the son woke up and the nurses are rounding for the patient's meds, they found out that the old lady was dead. After that, I never saw the figure again. Maybe it moved to a different ward, I don't know. But I was glad that it didn't take my grandma at that time. So this just happened 30 minutes ago. Some backstory. My friend and I decided to go to the mall and look for some shoes for our upcoming trip. This wall is mostly well known. We have celebrities come visit here and there. It's a decently safe city. There's not much crime in that city. We had no luck with the shopping, so we decided to head back to my friend's car. She parked on the far side of the parking lot because she thought it was funny to make us walks, since I had just eaten an hour earlier. As we walked to the car talking about swimwear and our future trip, we started to notice a car behind us. It had plenty of space to the right to move around us without harming us, but it kept following slowly behind us. It was black, with fully tinted windows. Unfortunately, its headlights were too bright for us to see who was inside. As we neared our car, my friend said, "What the heck is up with the car behind us?" "I know, it could have gone around us long ago," I responded. We walked to our car and she opened her trunk to put her stuff inside. I kept an eye on the car. It was stopped near our car. I was beginning to panic. It had no reason to stop. Its path was clear now. I looked to my right and was relieved to see another car slowly exiting its parking lane. My friend closed her trunk and walked over to the driver's seat. As soon as she touched the door handle, the car that seemed to be following us sped into the empty spot next to her. By this time, she opened the door and got inside. I jumped in the passenger side and told her to lock the door. The car didn't move for about 5 seconds, then immediately backed up and left into another parking lane. It may not seem like much, but just last week, 2 girls were chased by 2 men in a parking lot in the same city. One guy was on foot, and the other was in his vehicle. I don't know, the whole thing just seemed off. I think we got lucky that second car exited on time to scare off the person following us. I don't know where to post this, but I guess this is as good a place as any. I've been a long lurker of the horror community, and finally decided to share one of my stories that I've tried to block out of my mind. I have posted pictures that I took during the day, and before you ask, no, I do not have the camera or the drive that the pictures were on. I tried looking through the metadata of the pictures and videos that I captured, but the time frame that we hiked and the timestamp on the images were way off. With that being said, I'm most certain that I have a picture that was taken right at the time of the event, but again, I don't know which one it is. Now, onto the story. The following story took place on July 19th, 2011. So a little background. Every summer since I was 7, I would go out to California to visit my dad. He would take me up and down the state, visiting all the cool places a kid wanted to go. As I got older, he started to take me to national parks like Yellowstone, Redwoods, and Yosemite. During this year in particular, he wanted to go back to Yosemite and rent one of those tents you see in a village campsite. I was really excited since the last time we went there, we stayed in a hotel that was nearly 2 hours outside of the park. He also mentioned we should hit the park's infamous Mist Trail that goes up Vernal Falls again since, well, last time I had difficulty hiking up it because my feet were killing me. He even hinted that he wanted to go down to the John Muir Trail that was on the top of the falls. Now, John Muir, for those of you who don't know, he's a bit of a California legend. He sought out to preserve some of the wilderness lands in the United States. His most notable accomplishment was establishing Yosemite as a national park in 1890. But even after his death, the man had a hospital and a middle school named after him. The last bit of information that I want to point out here was during the year Yosemite set its record of its waterfalls being 3 times more powerful than ever, due to the amount of snow and rain it had received during the winter and springtime. I think it was even featured in the Mighty News when Brian Williams was on at one time. On the morning of the hike, both my dad and I woke with excitement. The 2 of us had trained for this day, with me being a cross-country team for my school, and him working out at the gym. We were more than ready to take on such an amazing trail. We packed our backpacks, put our hiking boots on, and drove my dad's SUV to the trailhead parking lot. When we got there, it was around 8:30, and the parking lot was already full. I guess there were a lot of people eager to see this once-in-a-lifetime moment. We had to park all the way over where Curry Village was. This will be important for later. After a mile and a half, we finally reached the trailhead now. The first part of the Mist Trail is paved and it has some steep inclines, nothing too extreme. After you reach the end of the paved trail, you go across a footbridge over the stream that's at the bottom of the falls. However, that little stream is full-blown rapid river. Now keep in mind the park at the time had very limited signs and guardrails around the water areas, so it wasn't uncommon to see people wander off the trail to be by the stream to sunbathe or dip their feet in. Kids would also go in and splash each other like at their water park. My dad and I were also guilty of going off the trails to take pictures and such. Some of my pictures that I provided for you guys shows just how easy it was to be by the water. As for the park rangers, some of them didn't really mind at the time. In fact, it was kind of nice having people explore the park, just as long as we were cautious and used good judgment. I haven't been back to Yosemite since this event, so I don't know how strict they are now with this trail. I forgot to mention this earlier, but the trail isn't for everybody. Once you pass the footbridge, it's all uphill and you have to climb up those stone steps. Some of the steps had eroded or washed away over the years, which made it extra difficult to climb in certain areas, especially when it got to be really narrow. You also have to combat the mist from the falls and not lose your footing, otherwise you might fall over the edge and into the water. After our short break, my dad and I started to head up Vernal Falls, and like I mentioned earlier, the mist from the falls was intense, but it was rewarding in a way. When we got to the top, it was almost noon and we were ready to tear open our lunches. But before we did that, we went over to the John Muir trailhead where we were talking some along the way. The trail wasn't too long, but if we wanted to get back to the parking, we would have to take another trail, which took way longer than the mist trail. We came to the conclusion that we would think about during our lunch, and hunger now is overwhelming. That's when my dad asked me if he should eat by the falls or find a quieter place. Till this day, I still don't know what made him blurt it out, but we should find a quieter spot from the falls and the other noisy tourists. My dad agreed and we made our way up the river to the point that became a small creek, and sat down at a picnic area. There was no one in sight, and all we could hear was the water flowing in the stream and the birds chirping. As we were finishing up, we saw a bunch of people coming from every direction, and they weren't walking or running. It was as if they were in a rush to get somewhere, but didn't know where to go. We didn't think anything of it, and decided to head over to the stream and went back to the falls. Now to get to the stream, you had to walk over a bunch of rock that were fun to climb up and jump over. We approached one such jump over a gap. My dad went first, making it look easy, while I, on the other hand, had to get a running head start. As I made my way over the gap, I heard something hiss and sort of jump at my leg. Upon landing, I quickly turned around to see a coiled up rattlesnake in the gap with its eyes fixated on me. Luckily, he didn't bite me, and I was a safe distance away from it to do anything. I called out for my dad, who was like Indiana Jones when it comes to snakes. I pointed out the snake, and when he saw it, his face turned a pale white. I laughed as he backed away in fear, and as he did that, another hiker was making their way right for the gap. I immediately told him to go around the gap. He had a confused expression on his face. Then once came around to our other side and saw the rattlesnake. He took out his phone to take pictures and video of the snake. At this point, my dad had enough of the snake and made his way to the stream, to which I followed him, hoping the guy wouldn't get bit. The creek was pretty shallow, and it was hard to believe that it turned into this roaring waterfall. I stayed at the edge of the creek and soaked my bandana in the cold, while my dad went a little further and bent down to do the same. Then all of a sudden, this Middle Eastern guy came out of nowhere and started talking to my dad in a frantic voice. He said something along the lines of, "Sir, you're not allowed to be in there. Please, get out of the water." Like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't uncommon to see people by the water, especially near a small stream like this one. It was very odd though, because the guy wasn't a park ranger, nor was he dressed for hiking. My dad slowly got up and said to the guy, "We're just soaking our sweatbands before we head back down. Everything's fine." The man grew more concerned. "Sir, please, you need to get out of the water now. It's very dangerous. I just saw 3 people die right from where you're standing." Then the man turned to me and said, "Son, if you value your father's life, you have to get him out of there." I'm completely speechless at this point, and my dad was ignoring the man pleas. But before either one of us could say or do anything, the man runs off trying to warn other tourists that were getting closer to the water. After he was out of sight, my dad got out and we grabbed our backpacks and headed towards the falls. As we were walking, I asked my dad what the guy meant when he said he had saw 3 people die standing in a small stream. He looked at me confused as well, but reassured me that they fell and hurt themselves or something. That confused me even more. The stream is powerful as the falls, so how could someone lose their footing and die? The thought didn't last long because I was then distracted by the crowd of people that were gathered around the area where I had spotted the rattlesnake. We're about to find a park ranger so that nobody would get hurt, but for some odd reason, there wasn't one in sight. We kept walking till we finally made it to the falls, and at that point, we were already exhausted from the hike up, then decided to go back down the mist trail. When we got to the trailhead, there was a large crowd of people blocking the trail, impatient. We made our way through the group of people and confused hikers, and then that's when we saw the caution tape all along the trail itself. There must have been 15 park rangers scouting the area and telling hikers coming up the trail to turn back immediately. Someone asked one of the rangers why they were closing off the trail, and in the most calm and professional tone, the park ranger said, "Oh, everything's all right. There was a dead animal that was found on the trail and the smell is really unbearable. We're trying to remove it. But for now, the mist trail is closed until further notice. Everyone here will have to take the John Muir trail to go back down." I immediately knew something was off. There was way too much caution tape for just one dead animal. And why were they taping off edges near the falls? Also, the 2 park rangers that were on the trail weren't looking on the trail itself. They were looking down into the water. Then I heard static on one of their radios. All I could make out was something about missing hikers. The John Muir Trail turned out to be a pretty nice detour. That is until we hit the Panorama Trail. It was caked with horse droppings and the smell was really bad, as you could imagine, and it went on for 10 miles. We caught up with some of the other hikers along the way, and they were speculating what actually had happened. One said that there was a bear that had died and the rangers had a dump truck to haul it away. Another said it was a moose or a deer. I swear it's pretty funny what people come up with in these types of situations, but all of them would be wrong. About 2 hours later, we all finally got to the bottom of the trail. My legs feel like jelly at this point. And we still needed to go to the parking lot. On our way there, we spotted a park ranger standing guard at the mist trailhead. Curiosity got the better of my dad, and he went over to the ranger and asked what had actually happened. The ranger, knowing that my dad wasn't buying the whole dead animal story, let out a sigh, and with a hesitant expression on his face, said, "There are these 3 hikers that were part of this church group. They all decided to go over the railings that were near the top of the falls to take some pictures. The first victim went into the water and eventually lost their footing and fell. It was only a matter of time for the current to take him down the waterfall. Then 2 more hikers from the group went in and tried to save him, but they also lost their footing and were overtaken by the current. It was at this point people who were witnessing this occurred discouraged others from jumping in, unless they wanted to have the same thing happen to them. If the drop didn't kill them instantly, then the rocks below would have torn them apart. The trail was closed shortly after in fear of one of their bodies being on it. I sat there mortified. If we had decided to eat our lunch there, we would have been one of the many dozens of people to witness this horrible event, and do nothing but stand there and watch as 3 people fell to their fate. What the ranger said next still haunts me to this day. Due to the falls and rapids being so powerful as they are now, We can't recover the bodies until it dies down in October or November. My heart sunk into my chest, thinking about the friends and family members of the victims, and that it's going to be a while for their recovery. We got into the car and our legs were aching from that 12-mile hike, and the rest of the way back was silent. I never brought it up again to my dad, and that was that. I still think about the Middle Eastern guy telling my dad to get out. I don't know what I would have done if my dad was one of those victims. This just goes to show that no picture is worth risking your own life. I linked some articles of this event. You can also do some research on your own. And one of the articles I had listed is a follow-up on the bodies being recovered. I'll summarize it here in case you don't want to read it. Hormus David, 22 years old, was the first to be discovered a month after the incident. He was pinned against a boulder 240 feet downstream. Ninos Yakub, age 27, was found on November 29th trapped under towering boulders that weren't visible until the river level was at its lowest. Then that following Saturday, Ramina Badal, 21 years old, was found. The three were a close-knit community of Central Valley Christians from the Middle East. My heart goes out to the friends and families of the victims. May they rest in peace. Thank you for reading my post.